Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Fantasy Football by Committee, a fantasy football show here hosted by FlurrySports and soon to be audio podcast. If you are an audio podcast listener, just know we go live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, pretty much everywhere. Just find Flurry Sports, follow it, and we will be going live there for sure during fantasy football season, pretty much every weekday. Right now, we've been doing a lot of Wednesdays and Thursday nights. So if you want your questions answered live, you want to jump in and participate with the show, that is the thing to do. Otherwise, throughout the year, the fantasy year, we will be asking for questions on YouTube, Twitter, stuff like that, that we can go over through articles on FlurrySports.org and in the podcast form as well. So hopefully a lot of audience participation, because I feel like that is what's going to make this show great. I think, we want to give you what you want. So communicate with us. We'll help you out. In addition to that, we have a fantasy football draft kit for free coming out before draft season. So let us know what you want from that as well. Working on that as we speak. I'm Zach Bruner, Trevor Land to my right. Luke should be back tomorrow night. If you are watching live, should be back Thursday. Tonight, we are going over the AFC North. Tomorrow, we'll be going over the AFC South. But yeah, Trevor, anything you want to say before we jump into the AFC North, which I think could be a sneaky pick for best division in football?
Yeah, that's actually what I was just about to say. We've talked about the East divisions the last 2 weeks, and although there are definitely some value guys, I mean, there's not a lot of value, especially at receiver. It seems like it's a little top heavy. So this division could be very good because I don't think there's a bad team in the division. Like the Browns would probably be the bad team, and even then, I mean, Deshaun Watson's going to be better than last year. So really, there's no reason to think there would be a bad team in the division. Probably the worst team, 500 maybe.
I mean, that's what it's shaping up to be. Yeah, I would say Browns are probably pegged as the worst team. If you ask ESPN, they did their breakdown of best rosters in football. They had the Browns as the sixth best roster in football, which I think is a little high for me. It might have been second best in the division. I don't remember, but six is a little wild. I think they're good. I think they're underrated. I don't think they are a top 10 team. But to your point, Deshaun Watson plays like, Houston Texans, Deshaun Watson. Never know. Never know. Because I feel like they got a good offensive line. They got good receivers. They have a good running back. Defense, I think, is still a little iffy. But for fantasy football, we can just jump into them overall because I do think there are good weapons. And we can start with Deshaun Watson. Obviously, he was suspended last year. I will, start this off just by saying, I think it's, people do need to make a decision if they want to roster him or not. I know a lot of people who will take the moral stance of for sure not rostering him under any consideration, any circumstances, and that's totally cool. Completely get that. But for the people who do, he was not very good last year. He started to look a little bit better in his final couple games, but he's currently going as the 10th quarterback off the board right now, which is 88th overall. And we'll both share our thoughts on it, but I'm in a dynasty league with you. You saw I traded for him. I obviously think he's going to be pretty good. I don't think he's ever going to be the fantasy stud that he was in Houston. I feel like he was playing with zero pressure, and I feel like he has all of the pressure now. Not only is he on a team that's expected to do something, but obviously all the legal drama and bullshit as well that he's going to have to prove himself 10 times over just to be back to zero. But I do think he's a good quarterback. I'm interested to see what you think about 10th best, though.
10th best is tough. I know you may agree that it's okay to not pick him on some moral high ground. I'm going to take the opposite side. I think it's incredibly dumb to take somebody on moral high ground. I think if you didn't win your league, I don't think you can probably remember a single person on the guy's team that won. So it's going to be irrelevant
Yeah.
anyways, whoever helps you win. But in terms of top 10, I don't know if I'd put him top 10. I don't think he's top 10 for me right now, but I think there is a much higher chance that he does finish top 10 than some of the other guys on the cusp just because of his running ability. So, like, in terms of if you compare him to other guys around the top 10 that can't run, obviously that's going to be a lower floor. So, if something goes wrong, a receiver goes down, they're in a tough spot. Whereas I think Deshaun Watson could be okay. I don't think I'd put him top 10 right now, but I don't think I'd put him much lower.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. In terms of like moral high ground, like I guess there's two reasons to not roster him. One is moral high ground, and again, to your point, I also feel like I'd be like whatever. I think you can separate it a little bit. The other side that I do understand is people just don't want to cheer for him. And if he's on your fantasy team, I feel like you are inherently cheering for him. So I understand not wanting to support him whatsoever, even if it's totally like on the back burner. Like you're just hoping he doesn't get you a zero, but whatever. I traded for him, so it tells you where I am. I think he's scum. I think he's a piece of shit. I think he's a good quarterback. So I can separate the art from the artist, so to speak. But to talk about top 10, that would put him just behind in ADP right now, just behind Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, just ahead of Tua, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers. So I kind of do feel like he's in the right spot. Like if Tua stays healthy somehow and plays every game, I think there's no doubt he finishes higher. I just don't think that happens. Kirk Cousins, I think he can definitely finish higher than Kirk Cousins. Daniel Jones, same thing. Aaron Rodgers, same thing. For the people ahead of him, I think he is just as good, if not better, than both Dak and Trevor Lawrence. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty good too. I mean, I think everybody that knows football knows that Tua isn't going to play a full season. So when I heard that name, I mean, he obviously should be ahead of Tua. But I think the other thing for me, and I usually read into this more than other people do, but the big thing for me is I don't see this Cleveland Browns team blowing many people out. I mean, we talked about their division. Their division is good. So they're going to be in a lot of tight games. So they're going to need him. Like there isn't a scenario where I can see where there are going to be a lot of games where they're just going to be running the clock out or being conservative. So he's going to be used heavily. I don't think this team is going to be so bad, obviously, where they sit him or rest him or whatever. So he's got the usage there where I think, other quarterbacks, Daniel Jones could certainly see games like that. Tua, maybe. So yeah, I think his floor is just, it might be the most solid compared to everybody in that list outside of maybe Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And usually I would assume on an on game per game basis, I bet he averages 30, 35 rushing yards. So there's 3 points, So like to that point, yeah, floor is super safe. I think his weapons are pretty good. Obviously, we'll talk about them in a second. And then I'm not sure if I said it, but QB10, that means he's going 88th overall right now. And I like that value as someone who always waits on quarterback. I'm willing to wait even longer than this, but 88's not that bad. That's right after Jahan Dotson, Brandon Cooks. Is just ahead of Antonio Gibson, Cortland Sutton, Gabe Davis. So obviously it's an area with receivers and running backs with a ton of question marks. And, with that in mind, it feels like he's the safest player in that bunch. So I
Yeah,
like it.
absolutely. Like if you're drafting those scenarios, you probably have a good running back, good wide receiver already. If you're looking, you probably have that depth short up. So now you're talking about a possible game changer quarterback that can be one of the top 10 quarterbacks and lead your team, or a guy that's on the bench that you don't really know whenever to plug and play him. I'm going with the game changing quarterback every time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you can feel comfortable if he's your QB1 going into the season. And I expect his ADP to rise, obviously, through the draft process if we see some highlights out of training camp from preseason, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see how high he rises. But for right now, I like it. On the flip side, a guy who's not necessarily a great value, but he's a great player is Nick Chubb. He's going as running back 6, and all ADPs are PPR based. So he's going 15th overall, RB6. Last season, he finished RB6. He's a top 12 running back 8 times. I think deemed by a lot of people, and including myself, as one of, if not the best pure runner in the game right now. I think it's just as a pure rushing running back, he is tremendous. He plays behind a good offensive line. And at the current moment, he has the least amount of competition he has had in some time because his backup is Jerome Ford. And we can talk about them both really quick at the same time. Jerome Ford is going as running back 56 overall, 180. I will say I don't think that will be the case. I don't think Jerome Ford will be the RB2 heading into the year. If somehow he is, like, he's going to trend up draft boards, but I think it's a lot more likely the RB2 is Ezekiel Elliott or Kareem Hunt. I think both of those make a lot of sense. Hunt, I think, repaired some things before his exit. And Ezekiel Elliott, obviously the return to Ohio, I think makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of things there that they could do. But just speaking on Nick Chubb, I guess, Nick Chubb, certified stud. Are you cool with 15th overall for him?
Absolutely. I'd even take him in the first round. Dude was RB6 in PPR last year, at least for full PPR, and he had one touchdown over the last 6 weeks. He's absolutely incredible. He's the model of consistency. I feel like he's gotten to a point almost where he's so consistent, he's not a sexy pick. He's just kind of
Agreed.
a solid pick that nobody likes to make. And I think that is something that definitely you can use to your advantage because I think everybody wants the flashy players. He gets the job done. I'm going to take him in every draft. There are no questions about RB2. I don't care who the RB2 here is. Even when it was Kareem Hunt, he was an incredibly solid player. So I see no reason, no matter what happens in this backfield, to care about that. I would take him first round if need be.
Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't really. They could add Dalvin Cook, and Nick Chubb's still going to get his. I think he's completely safe. To your point, Kareem Hunt there last year. Nick Chubb had 302 carries, so not a worry there. I think he can do more in the receiving game. I think he is fully capable of doing that. I've been saying that for a while, and he's been basically doing the exact same production every single year as a receiver. So we'll see if that happens. But again, if the only addition to the backfield is an Ezekiel Elliott, I think Nick Chubb's actually going to do more receiving work then as well. So I think there's potential for him to have his best fantasy year, to be completely honest. And with to your point, then again, like that means he's a clear certified first round pick. You don't want to have a bust as a first round pick. And the only way Nick Chubb busts is if he gets hurt. Whereas there's some
Yeah,
other players where like they could just have bad seasons.
yeah, and that's the big thing too. Like you've talked about it, and I'm starting to slowly come to your side on it. Like it's impossible to predict injuries. Obviously,
Yeah.
some guys are more injury prone than others, but it's impossible. Even with him, like there's no reason to even think. I think he's missed what 3 games 2 years ago, 5 games his rookie season, something like that. Like he's been the model of consistency, and that's something that just doesn't happen at running back. It's just not a thing. So there's really no reason to be concerned about this guy. And if he gets hurt, like at the end of the season, you're not kicking yourself. If you draft an Austin Eckler there, there were some signs. But if you draft a Nick Chubb, like that's just one of those where you kind of gotta, what happened.
Yeah, most carries of his career last year, still played every single game. So he should be good to go. He's currently squatting a house as we speak, I believe. I feel like every other day I see a new squatting video from him, which is awesome. It just gives me, I get triggered by squatting videos because I've seen too many videos where I see someone's knee flies out the backside and I can't do it. So usually when there's a squatting video, I turn it off. At least when I know it's Nick Chubb, it's like, oh, he's going to rep 900 pounds here. So I feel okay about it
One,
with the flexible bar too.
we need to let people squat and have fun with it, right? Like there were a lot of people hating on the Badgers for like dressing up and getting pumped. Like just let them lift
Oh,
some weights. Let guys be dudes here.
yeah. I mean, by the way, squatting too, that's when you need to celebrate. Like you can put a lot of pounds up and down, and people, you got to freak out about it. It's not like bench where bench is lame, clean is lame. So let people squat. It looks super impressive. Let them do it.
If you haven't ever wanted to yell out after lifting a heavy weight, you're not lifting enough weights. That's how I look at it.
True. Very true. But okay, so Nick Chubb, first round pick, good. If Jerome Ford somehow is the RB2 going into the season, I think the only way you want him is if you have Nick Chubb. I just don't see him having much standalone value, at least on a consistent basis. So, as of right now, if you're doing best ball drafts, if you're doing anything like that, I'm avoiding him. I don't need to pay any attention to it.
I don't even think like I can definitely see why you'd want him if you have Nick Chubb. I'm not even thinking that. Like he's been so durable in the past, and like that's one roster space can go a long ways in some leagues.
Mm-hmm.
So having a backup in case the most durable running back in the game gets hurt, that's just not something for me.
No, I mean we'll talk about different running back rooms in the AFC North. I feel like I'd rather have the RB3 on most of the other teams than Jerome Ford, which is kind of wild. But let's go wide receiver here. Amari Cooper. I've been an Amari Cooper hater for a long time, but he was great last year. He played every game, first off, and then he finished as wide receiver 10. He had 6 top 12 weeks. He played pretty good outdoors, which is something I've obviously criticized him heavily for. He continues to be elite when he's on turf. So, for DFS purposes, if he's playing indoors, play him. But yeah, wide receiver 10 last year. He's going as wide receiver 17 this year, 37 overall. So are you buying that as value, or what's your thoughts on Amari Cooper at 17th wide receiver?
Amari Cooper is tough for me. I think I'm buying him at 17th wide receiver, you said, right?
Yep.
I think I'm buying him there. I just it's tough. Like don't get me wrong, he's consistent with touchdowns, 7 through 9 touchdowns in each of his last 6 seasons outside of like one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you'd think a primary option would get more. Um, he what I'm trying to say is I would not like him as a one. I think I like him as a really strong two. Um, you just I don't know, just seeing his reception yards, his longest in the career, not even being 1,200 yards, not having 10 touchdowns. It's just not a lot of optimism for him. I think there should be more there. I think some of that comes with Deshaun Watson being better and him having a better quarterback, but
Mm-hmm.
um, I like him there, not much higher though.
Yeah, I feel like he's in around the right spot, which is hard for me to criticize. He's going just ahead of Keenan Allen, though, who I think I would prefer. He's going ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, he doesn't have a home yet, but I prefer him wherever he goes, I think. And then there's the Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, Chris Godwin, Jerry Jeudy tier there. So I like Cooper above those guys, I think. So I think he's right around the right spot. He's just a guy that's probably not going to end up on my fantasy team. I think you're muted.
He's a guy that I think if you get him, like, all right, like that's cool, it's a good pick. If you miss him though, like I don't think you're kicking yourself. Like I think it's like, yeah,
Mhm.
oh well, next one. And when you're talking about cheering for guys on your team, I don't know a lot of Amari Cooper fans. Like I'm not saying he's a tough guy to cheer for, but like he's just not a fun guy to cheer for, I guess. So in that perspective too, he's just kind of there, I guess.
I agree. And he is at least clearly the top wide receiver on the team. We can talk about the other two. They traded a second round pick for Elijah Moore from the Jets. Elijah Moore currently going as wide receiver 44 overall, 101 overall. Last year, obviously, was a disaster with the Jets. His rookie year, he averaged over 50 yards. That's receiving plus rushing. I could see him being sort of a gadget player in this offense, which I think makes him really intriguing. What are his touchdowns going to be? I don't know. At wide receiver 44, like I feel like there's other players that are going to be around there with more upside, but I think the talent is real with Elijah Moore. So I'm a little indifferent on him. I could be convinced either direction, I think.
Yeah,
What about
Elijah
you?
Moore, at least for me, is the most difficult wide receiver, I think, possibly in the NFL fantasy wise. Like, I don't know what I'm going to get out of him. I don't know. I mean, we don't know what Deshaun Watson is going to do with him. Like, we've seen quarterbacks not like good receivers before, but like, he's also only 23. I mean, if we're talking dynasty, so he's a great value there.
Mm-hmm.
I I kind of want to be hands off just because I don't think we know what he is. If somebody else wants to take that risk, fine. If he's good, I'll trade for him. But that's a tough spot to take him because there are some guys that have very high ceilings down there. And I don't know if Moore has a solid floor in this offense.
No, I think there's no floor. I think there's too much competition surrounding him where if he's still just not making plays, he's just not going to be on the field. They don't really have a reason to waste time with him. But trading for him, trading a second round pick for him suggests they have an idea of how they want to use him. So I'm optimistic. Again, I just need to see what they do in training camp. This is going to be one of probably my favorite spots to watch this entire receiving room because then there's also Donovan Peoples-Jones is going as wide receiver 62 overall, 154 with everybody. He was wide receiver 39 last year. I think he's too good of a player to finish as 62, wide receiver 62. Like I've been a Donovan Peoples-Jones supporter, I guess, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I just think he's a really solid player that is going to see targets because he's going to be on the field and he's going to see second or third cornerback. They're going to roll coverage to a different side than him, and he's just going to be open. He's always open somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to discount his 2020 season. Obviously, he only played 12 games, didn't have Deshaun Watson at quarterback, didn't have him in 2021 either. But last 2 years, I think his finishes were 38 and 65 for PPR. To your point, he's going to be playing worse cornerbacks. And one of the big knocks on him, at least from me, has been his touchdowns. He just doesn't score them. He has 3-3-2 his last 3 years. To your point, when you get the worst cornerbacks, you think that's going to be there too. He can give him a deep threat. We know Deshaun Watson can throw that. So I look at him. That's a very low floor to hit. I think at the very least he can do that. If he hits the floor, whatever, you're out nothing. But I think he's got a really good chance to beat that. I don't think he'll be a wide receiver 2, but he's got a decent chance to beat that ADP. And so when you're looking at it that way, I mean, I think he's a solid player there.
Yeah, I played in a lot of really deep leagues, and he's always one of those players I pick up as my wide receiver 3 because I know he's going to give me 8 points. Like I just need something out of that position because I have injuries or something else. So, like, I don't think he's a player you need to draft. I think he's going to be there on waivers. People are hesitant to pick him up for whatever reason. I just think he's going to be quietly solid. I think he's going to finish higher than people think. And maybe the rookie as well, Cedric Tillman. He's going as wide receiver 104. He's a big play guy, and I think he's going to be really good. I think he's going to be a really good player. He's one of my favorite dynasty value picks amongst his rookie class. And I don't have much to say. I feel like he's playing the waiting game for one of the guys ahead of him to leave the team, probably. But so I like him more in dynasty than redraft for this year. But he's just somebody to keep an eye on, I think. That's all I really have to say. Like, you're not drafting him, but watch him.
Yeah, I got nothing to say about him because I don't know much about him. This wide receiver group is oddly good, but also thin at the same time, I think. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to kind of kick back and wait on these guys. But I think this is a better wide receiver room fantasy-wise than people give him credit for.
Yeah, and I mean, they have a lot of speed behind those guys as well. They're not fantasy relevant, but Marquise Goodwin's still in the NFL. He's there. They got Anthony Schwartz, who's a speedster. David Bell was a draft pick from last year, so going into his second year, he's good. Jalen Darden's there. He's got speed. Jakeem Grant's got a shit ton of speed. So like they can run circles around people. Maybe they put 3 people back on kickoffs. I don't know what they're going to do, but they got a lot of speed in this receiving core. So I think it's interesting. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if it's going to be good. I have no idea, but it's interesting. Tight end. David Njoku is going as tight end 10, which just feels high to me. That's 98th overall. However, he finished as tight end 11 last year. He was tight end 8 on a per game basis. He is a top 12 tight end 6 times. So based on last year's performance, he's good. He's a good value. He's going right where he probably should. It's hard for me to trust David Njoku, even though I know the talent is there. I, he's just got more competition for targets now. So he's just not a guy I'm going to go out of my way, I guess, to get. But are you more of an Njoku believer? I don't know.
I love Njoku a lot as a player. You know, he was really kind of underwhelming for a lot of weeks, a lot of seasons. I mean, he's a really 50-50 guy, but his targets were consistently there for most of the year last year. Missed 3 games due to injury, so that's tough too. But it's just tough because he's, especially at down the stretch down end of last season, I don't care how many targets you get, he's not hauling them in. And I didn't watch a whole lot of Browns film. I'm assuming some of that was due to Watson, because he wasn't too great at the end. But also, to your point, Watson turned it on at the end of the year last year, and Njoku didn't see any of that.
That's
He
true.
didn't see anything from that, so I'm staying off of him. But I think that is also because he's a tight end. Like, I don't think you need to reach for any tight end outside of that first upper echelon tier. So I like him. I think he's good name value, but I think he's probably worth more on the trade market because of name value than he is at his current location.
That's fair. Backing him up is Jordan Atkins, who was with Deshaun Watson, at least for a little bit. He's a good receiving tight end. So I think Njoku might be on a slightly short leash, just in terms of if he's having a bad game, they at least have somebody else that they can put in there and be a receiver. So again, zero fantasy value on Atkins, at least at this current moment. But I think that makes his offense better overall. So now best sleeper, best value pick on the Browns. I think my best sleeper is Cedric Tillman, the rookie. Best value. I mean, probably Deshaun. Like, Donovan Peoples Jones, I think is going to finish higher, but I just don't think you need to draft him. So I'm going to go with Watson.
You said Chubb's going around 17 overall, correct?
15.
15. I'm gonna go Chubb actually, just because I think he's a bona fide first round pick. If you can get him there, great. If you can get him in the second, coming back, I mean, you're set.
Fair enough. Let's go to Pittsburgh. At quarterback, first off, I guess this is a team they added to their offensive line. I think their offensive line looks pretty good now. Their wide receivers are always good. Najee Harris has been playing behind tissue paper at offensive line, so he's been held back a little bit. And then their offensive coordinator is the biggest doofus possibly in the entire league. So that is something to keep in mind throughout this entire conversation with the Steelers. Even if the Steelers have the most talent of all time, Matt Canada somehow has figured out how to mess it up. So with everything I say, I am being hesitant on the Steelers just with that in mind. So Kenny Pickett, obviously last year was a rookie, played decent, didn't play necessarily good or great. And a big reason for that, again, Matt Canada. There's no hot checks. Like if you saw blitz, he couldn't fucking check out of it. It's insane. But he's going as quarterback 23, 167 overall. He averaged a little over 12 fantasy points per game. I don't see a potential high ceiling for him this year at all. So I just feel there's zero reason to draft Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I hated him last year because the offensive line, the offensive coordinator. Canada was there in 2021 when they played the Packers, right?
Yep,
That was one of
for
the
sure.
most incompetent offensive game plans I've ever seen. If you can go back and watch that game, but back to Pickett, like his offensive line is better. I don't hate him anymore compared to last year with that offensive line. I think he can be good, but like I don't buy the Steelers. And to your point, it's mostly because the offensive coordinator, he doesn't move the needle at best. He's a mid-tier quarterback, and I mean you can stream that every week if you really want to. So I don't think there's a need to have him at all, especially in a somewhat not somewhat a competitive division with great defenses.
Agreed. Running back Najee Harris. He's going as running back 11. That's 28th overall. Last year he finished as running back 14. He had a top 12 performance only 4 times. His average, like rushing, hasn't been very good, but he keeps getting hit behind the offensive line. His touchdowns aren't spectacular, and that's because, again, there's zero push from the offensive line in recent years. That should be better. So him going as running back 11, again, 28th overall, I don't hate that. I don't hate that because I don't think there's any question about Najee Harris's talent. So because of that, if I can buy low on the team around him, essentially, I think I'm willing to do that with Harris.
Yeah, yeah, I love buying him there too. I mean, really, the only difference between last year and this year, I mean, touchdowns were exact same between 2021, 2022. About 150 rushing yards on less carries. The big difference is just the receiving work. He didn't have nearly as much receiving work last year. I think that's something. Again, it's a big ask because Matt Canada there, but if the Steelers are smart, they know they have to get it to him out of the backfield. So obviously PPR, half PPR, he skyrockets there. I think everybody's all out on him on one bad season when a decent amount of that wasn't his fault. So I like him there. I obviously definitely I think the question of him being an RB1 is definitely gone until at least they get another offense coordinator. But I mean, if you're putting me in a point where 28 overall, I mean, there's a theoretical world where he could be an RB3. Not saying that's a great way to build your roster, but if he's an RB3, I think you have a lot of good things going for you.
Yeah, if that somehow happens, I think you're good to go. Part of the reason Najee didn't get the receiving work last year, part of it's because he had to stay in and block instead of running a screen. They just used him as a pass protector because the offensive line was so bad. Another reason is because Jaylen Warren, who's the RB2 there, they like him a lot. They want to get him involved as well. He is currently going as running back 51, 157 overall. Last year, he had 33 targets, so 28 receptions to Najee's 41. So relatively close. Their yardage was essentially the same from a receiving standpoint. And then he also had 77 carries. So I think he's somebody they actually want to get a little bit more involved, which, again, if you're a Najee owner, I think that sucks. I don't think it's anything to worry about. I don't think it's anything necessarily new. So I don't think you're downgrading Najee Harris this year because Jaylen Warren's going to get more involved. But I think in a perfect world, the Steelers want Warren to be almost a Jamal Williams-like player from a fantasy perspective. Like, he's not super flashy. He's going to be solid. He's going to get his touches on a per game basis. And from a fantasy perspective, he's probably like a low end flex. So if you have Najee, I think he's a handcuff with upside. And if you don't have Najee, he's somebody you can target, I think, in the late rounds that actually could have value, even if Najee Harris is healthy.
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways to look at it. I think there's no real negative way for either of these players. Like, if you're a Najee owner, the good way to look at Jaylen Warren, he had one touchdown last year, carries amassed past 10 twice, receiving work, really didn't get more than 4 targets in any game but one. Like, he's not a huge threat. He's not like a Pollard that might steal Ezekiel Elliott's touchdowns or anything like that, or even anywhere close to the work. If you're a Jaylen Warren owner, obviously he might be one of the better handcuffs, and we know that they want to get him involved, which is more that can be said about multiple RB2s. So I'm not a big Jaylen Warren believer, at least in fantasy, so I'm not touching him. But in the late rounds of the draft, when people are drafting kickers, defenses, I mean, if he's not one of the best handcuffs, I don't know who is at that point.
Completely agree. Moving on to the wide receivers, which is a position group that the Steelers have continued to do very well at. I would say their wide receiver one as of right now is Deontay Johnson. And he's going as wide receiver 30, which is 66 overall. Last year, he was wide receiver 28. He finished as a top 30 guy just 3 times. And a big reason for that is he had no touchdowns at all. His first 3 years in the league, he had 5, 7, 8, and then none last year. Obviously, going from Big Ben to Kenny Pickett's a big reason for that. Ben loved Deontay Johnson, who seemingly was always open when Ben was there. I don't think we should value Deontay Johnson the same way as we did when Ben Roethlisberger was the quarterback. However, like to say he gets 0 touchdowns again is obviously not going to be true. So with that in mind, if he finishes wide receiver 28 last year and he's going as wide receiver 30 this year, I think he's undervalued.
Yeah, he's definitely undervalued. I mean, the other thing to look at it too is obviously he was underwhelming last year. I think PPR 30. He had 147 targets. He only caught 86 of those. A lot of those are because Pickett couldn't be accurate because he was busy getting absolutely smoked by the defense.
Yeah.
He's gonna have better blocking. I can't imagine a world in which he gets less receptions if he sees that amount of targets. And clearly, he's the guy. Like he's the PPR guy there. Um, so that's going to come up too. So I mean, even if he wasn't to score a touchdown, which to your point isn't going to happen, he's going to be better this year. So we're putting him at his lowest of lows over the last 3 years at the ADP. I like taking him there too. And I think he might drop a little further than that because everybody loves the big flashy George Pickens. Not saying that's wrong, but I wouldn't be shocked if his ADP falls below Pickens because Pickens has that name and the flash that people love to see.
I completely agree. And I just wanted to look it up because in my mind, this was true and it looks like it is. Like Deontay Johnson has a little bit of a drop issue, obviously. He had 8 last year, 8 the year before that, 15 in his rookie year. But I will say, like, yes, it sucks. Yes, it limits him a little bit. Not a ton, but a little bit. But the Steelers very clearly believe in him. Like, the drops haven't done anything to get the Steelers off of him. They haven't drafted his replacement. They traded Chase Claypool out of town. Like, they could have traded they could have traded Johnson, I suppose. It's a different role, but they could have done that. They didn't. So I think you can believe in him. I think he's slightly undervalued, but let's talk about George Pickens, the bigger, the flashier. He's going as wide receiver 37. That's 82 overall. Last year, he finished as wide receiver 40. So obviously 12 spots behind Deontay Johnson. However, this is where I think I go towards Pickens than Johnson. George Pickens finished as a top 30 guy 7 times. So 4 more times than Deontay Johnson. I think his upside is higher. I think he's going to have more big weeks. I think he's a better touchdown guy just because of his range. Catch radius essentially is a lot higher. We saw that last year with some of those crazy catches. I think he's a bully on the outside. I think he's a star in the making. I think he's going to be a very, very good player. I don't think we need to value either guy as anything above a wide receiver 3 currently. But if you're saying one of these guys finishes as a wide receiver 2 or something, I think it's probably Pickens. So even though he's going behind Johnson, even though I think his floor is lower than Johnson, I think I prefer him out of the Steelers duo.
I don't know who I'd prefer either way. I just don't have a real take on it yet. But
Sure.
I think we talk about the offensive line. We talk about probably definitely a better job running the ball. Deontay Johnson. That means he's probably going to get more receptions off of the targets he gets. Like all this works for everybody in the Steelers offense. Obviously, you still have a bad offensive coordinator, but this all
Mhm.
works to make it easier for the players. Deontay Johnson starts getting 10 receptions a game. Guess what? You can't double team, Pickens with a safety over top and just stop him all the time. So his touchdowns are going to be up. Those low games where he has 2 targets, you got to imagine those are going to come up. He was just very consistent at being inconsistent, but I think that's something that definitely is an easy fix. I don't think that's anything that is telling me it's going to continue down the road.
I think that's completely fair. Like I said at the top, Steelers are awesome at drafting wide receivers, probably the best team in the league in terms of hit rate. The biggest issue they had the past few years, in my opinion, is they didn't have a veteran in the room. They had a lot of really immature players, and they got rid of the most immature one in Chase Claypool. And in addition, they traded, I believe it was a trade, and they got Allen Robinson. There was a trade. So they got Allen Robinson. So they got a veteran who's been there, done that, who I think still can play a little bit there now. So Allen Robinson's their third guy. I don't think you need to draft him. He's going as wide receiver 89, 245. I don't think he's a fantasy impact guy at all. I just bring him up to say I think him being on the Steelers helps Pickens and Deontay Johnson out a ton. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I don't think you need to draft him, but the disrespect, and as somebody who has had him the last 2 years and has gone through what it's like to own Allen Robinson the last 2 years, the disrespect he's gotten is insane. 2 years before that, in his last two of his last 3 years are Chicago, wide receiver 9, wide receiver 7, 1,250 yards, 1,100 yards. Like he obviously knows what he's doing. He even had a good career at Jacksonville too. He knows what to do. He knows how to do it. He's also another guy where I don't think he's a big threat. Nobody's going to be like, oh, watch out, Allen Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have him, Johnson, and Pickens on the field, that's going to be a hell of a lot harder to defend than him, Claypool, and Pickens. Better offensive line as well, which everything goes back to. He knows how to play. He's a pro, and he's still only 29, so he's still got something in the legs. Like everything is looking up for the Steelers offense. I don't think they're going to be a juggernaut. I don't think you need to own Robinson, but I think he helps Pickens, to your point, more than just the eye can see.
Yeah, Robinson can still play. So watch out for him in DFS this year as a probably minimum play or close to minimum play. He's going to have his weeks where he finishes high and people rush to the waiver wire to pick him up and then get upset with him when he doesn't do much the week after. Watch us throughout the year to let you know. You probably can ignore him, but I think he's going to be relevant this year. And then their fourth wide receiver was hurt essentially his entire rookie year. Kelvin Austin's a small, super quick guy that I think they can use in a variety of ways. Again, it comes down to if Matt Canada can actually draw up a play and do something correct. But Kelvin Austin gives this offense something they do not have, and he could be a very, very good player, not consistent enough for fantasy, but someone who could be very boom or bust. And if you have a kick return only league or juice uh, points on kick return yards or something, that's where he could come in to play and be relevant, I suppose. But overall, ignore it. I'm just saying this is an offense that has a lot of potential. And if it doesn't work, I'm telling you why it won't work. It's Matt Canada. He sucks. He's terrible.
I mean, it's tough to see Calvin Austin the same height as me and a little lighter. That's not great. But I love gadget players. I think there's like if we're really thinking about it, if they have a decent offensive line, I think there's a really good way this offense can run if you have him be like a prime Tavon Austin role. And then obviously we talked about the wide receivers. We talk about Harris. You get him and Warren involved in the passing game. There's a whole lot of shit you can pull on the field. Will he pull it? Probably not. But Calvin Austin is also one injury away from having a role, so I don't think
Mhm.
he's probably not draftable. I definitely don't think he is. But
Right.
and especially with Gunnar Olszewski, who knows? Maybe they have Gunnar doing punts. I've assumed he
Yeah.
doesn't do kickoffs too. I'd assume that's Austin. But he's going to get kick return yards, and I mean, are there really any kick returners we'd really take over Calvin Austin? I mean, if you think so, just kind of look at his college tape.
Right. Shout out Gunnar Olszewski. I forgot he's there. Bemidji State product. Love to see it. Tight ends really quick then. Pat Fryermuth going as tight end 892 overall. He finished as tight end 7 last year. He's a top 12 tight end 9 times, which I was kind of surprised to see. I know I liked him last year, but that's actually relatively consistent for the tight end position. So at 92 overall, tight end 8, I'm buying it. I like it. I think if they don't run it in the red zone, they're probably throwing it to him.
Yeah, I love Fryermuth. The weird thing about him is, like, he had only 2 touchdowns last year. I know tight end's an easy position to hit the top whatever. He had 2 receiving touchdowns in week 2 and in week 14. So I mean, I don't care if Darnell Washington's there. I don't care if Connor Hayward is there or Zach Gentry's there. He's probably more in the realm of 4 to 6. And I mean, he's already shown he can be that tight end where he's being drafted right now. So I love him there. I don't think he has any problems with playing time, targets, any of that. They want to get him the ball. They're going to force feed him the ball.
And both Washington and Gentry are there to block, which is something they desperately need. So expect to see those guys on the field. Don't expect them to do anything for fantasy. That's still Pat Fryermuth. In terms of best value, best sleeper, I mean, I like George Pickens. I think that's where my pick's going to go. I could see Allen Robinson, but I think my best value is going to be Pickens.
I'm going to go Najee Harris. Is he going to be a RB1 or RB2 again, like I talked about? No. But some of the slander that is thrown on his name for stuff that is not his fault is insane. Offense is better. They can somewhat block now. People are just straight up saying they're not going to draft him. That's just insane.
Yeah, it's stupid. Baltimore Ravens. This is a team that has actually had quite a bit of change over this past offseason. A big reason possibly for it. Well, one was the Lamar Jackson situation. Two was the anonymous report cards that came out, and turns out the Ravens were a horrendous place to play. So I think a lot of changes were made there for that, hopefully. But I want to ask you this because I want to know your answer, and then we'll talk about the Ravens as a whole as a result. Like, do you think there's gonna be drastically more receiving yards, or no?
No, like I have no reason, and I'll get into it. I think fantasy wise, just like kind of last year, I think this is the toughest team to kind of predict. I love guys like J.K. Dobbins. I love Gus Edwards. I love Bateman. I love Beckham Jr. I love Devin Duvernay. I don't know offensively if it changes a lot, and I don't know if it does change a lot who to trust. Like I truly don't know, and I don't even know if training camp is going to help us out a ton. I feel like it's kind of a cluster here.
I agree. So let's talk about it then. So Lamar Jackson's going as quarterback 5, 42nd overall. He was injured a lot of last year, but he finished as QB6 on a per game basis. He had 7 weeks as a top 12 quarterback. He got paid this offseason. There was I don't think it was necessarily a press conference. It was sort of just press circling him, I believe, after practice. They asked him about the offense and stuff like that. New offensive coordinator. He says this offense is going to allow him to pass more. And people, especially in the fantasy community, I think overall, sports overall, took it as Lamar Jackson's not going to run anymore, which I think is absolutely horrendously stupid. We've seen how many times Lamar Jackson took off and run on passing plays. I think they're going to teach Lamar how to read both sides of the field, which is going to lead to more passes. I think there's going to be more they can do because there's more receiving targets or weapons, I should say, on the team. So I think there's going to be a little bit more passing, but I think overall this has to be the same offense, relatively speaking, that we've seen in years past. And I want to set that precedent that, and we both believe this apparently, when we talk about the wide receivers and the tight ends in a little bit, because targets have to come from somewhere and people are forgetting that they don't fucking fall out of a tree. So that's what we need to remember. But just speaking on Lamar right now, QB5, 42nd overall. Do you like that value? Would you take him there? What's your thoughts?
I'm not taking him there. If one of my buddies watching, I'm sorry. But we need to understand, and a lot of people still don't, there's a pretty big difference between being a good quarterback and a good fantasy quarterback. I don't think Lamar Jackson is a good quarterback. I don't think he's a smart quarterback. And when all that comes in a package with the quarterback who loves to run and whose emergency bailout option is to run, I can't trust any receiver. And I can't trust his body to take the hits. I mean, it hasn't been able to the past 2 years. I understand. I just talked about, injuries be tough to predict, but he can't keep getting hit like this. And this isn't something where you can say, oh, well, the offensive line could just be better, or you in these positions, and that's just who he is. It's how he plays, and he's going to continue to do that. I don't know if he can take the hits, and even if he does, quarterback 5 is a pretty high bar to be hitting. He can definitely hit it, but without passing, you better run for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns.
I agree. I think Lamar Jackson has the tools to be great. And a lot of people would say he is great. He's won an MVP. I would point to Matt Ryan, who is also an MVP, um, in Cam Newton. But like, I just don't think he's received proper coaching. I don't think he's been coached to play quarterback. And this year now, obviously new offensive coordinator, he kind of has a new quarterback coach. They turned their wide receiver coach into the quarterback coach. We will see what that does. But he hasn't been taught to do anything. I'm not even talking about passing. Like in terms of the mesh point when pulling it on like reads and stuff like that, he does it all wrong. So either he has been coached absolutely horrendously or he can't be coached. And I don't know which one it is. I'm not even going to pretend to know which one it is. I'm not going to put the blame on either one, I guess, even though I kind of came at the coaches at first. But I don't know. There's something wrong here, and that's what makes me step back on Lamar. Last year, the Ravens were one of my Super Bowl picks if they could stay healthy. I think I'm backing off of that too because of this. Like, there's just too much bad going on here. And truly, and maybe this sounds funny to say, I think the one person that could save everything is Odell Beckham because I think he's one of the best football players we've seen in the history of the NFL. I think he is a
Well,
severely underrated football mind and player, and I think he could make Lamar Jackson really, really good.
well, I mean, people forget. I'll say it. I think he was the MVP of the Super Bowl before he tore his ACL. The way
For
he
sure.
opened up the middle of the field changed everything. He tore his ACL. Shocker. The offense starts struggling. Cincinnati gets kind of back into the game. But beside the point, what you said about Lamar Jackson too hits home too because if it's bad coaching, he's been in the league for, let me make sure I have this correct. This is his what, sixth season in the league. If it's bad
Mhm.
coaching, I don't see bad 6 years of bad coaching plus what, 3 years of college being erased in one off season. That's just not going to happen. There's still going to be hiccups. So to your point, if it's bad coaching, which is the best case scenario, like we don't know, it probably can't be fixed in this season. Maybe next year, but not this year.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. Um, so him going as quarterback 5, I said 42nd overall. I don't hate it. I don't hate that draft position. However, if I'm the person who really, really, really likes Lamar, and I'm speaking, I guess, to the person, if you really, really, really like Lamar, you think that's a steal there, you think he's so damn good there. My question to you would be what's the difference between Lamar at 42 and Justin Fields at 54? Like I just think it's very similar, and I don't want to make one Russian quarterback equals another Russian quarterback. It doesn't, but both struggle to throw the football, and they're kind of in similar situations in a way. So I think I prefer Justin Fields around later if you think you can swing it.
Well, and on top of that, too, Justin Fields gets to play the Packers 2 times a year, and he gets to play the
True.
Vikings 2 times a year. Lamar Jackson plays the Bengals, the Steelers, and the Browns. The Browns are the worst defense, and they're probably defense number two in that FC North, probably, if not one.
Mhm.
Um, so just that alone is tough, too. Yeah, it's just, I like Lamar as a person. I do. I think he has tools, but, it's tough.
Okay. So I think kind of the rest of this team we can speed through. Running backs, J.K. Dobbins is going as RB 19, 48 overall. He averaged 10, a little over 10 points per game last year, obviously injured, which has kind of been the story. Like, I'm willing to be burnt on J.K. Dobbins for a year by not drafting him. That's kind of where I'm at. Like, I want to see him prove it. If I'm proved wrong and somebody else takes him right before me or right after me or whatever, and he's amazing, great. I'm just not going to be the person to draft him and he gets hurt. Oh, he played bad once again.
Yep, absolutely. I was one of the guys that was high on him with you last year. Week 4, he finally comes back full strength. I think he had 10 points, 15 points in the first quarter against Buffalo. Finished the game at 22. I think they gave him like what, 5 more carries that entire game, and he was cooking. Um,
Mhm.
and that was obviously before he got hurt. But when he's healthy, they don't give him the ball. When they do, he doesn't score a lot. He was non-existent in the passing game when he played last year. There's just not a lot of good going on here. And when you add an injury history, like, prove it. You're not going to lose a league because you don't draft J.K. Dobbins. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and I hope he's good. I think he has all the tools to be good. We'll see. Gus Edwards is the RB2. There, everyone knows I love Gus Edwards. He's going as running back 61 right now, which means undrafted, 203 overall, again undrafted. He averages 5 yards per carry essentially every time. He ran for over 700 yards his first 3 years in the league. Then he had injuries. So is he the same player? Yes or no? I think he is. I think he's a fantastic value. Um, if you pick him up as your fourth or fifth running back, I think again he's one of those guys where he is a handcuff with upside. I think he has value when J.K. Dobbins is healthy. If J.K. Dobbins goes down hurt, you just talked about his injury history. I think Gus Edwards could be an RB1, probably more so RB2, but he could be an RB1. So I love Gus Edwards' value a lot.
Yeah, Gus Edwards, I think he's the running. If you have to get a running back in this backfield, it's him. Last year, played 9 games, 66 in PPR. The last two full seasons, he had 37 and 52. Rookie year, played 11 games, 56. He's slated as undrafted. He is 80 is past PPR finishes when he even plays 9 games beats that. So clearly he doesn't have to do much to beat it. And if J.K. Dobbins goes down, which he will, the only question is when Gus Edwards will go down, if at all. He's going to be a great pick. So I definitely don't think draft him. Maybe in the last round if you want to. But again, if you're going to take somebody, it's Gus Edwards over J.K. Dobbins.
Now talking about these receivers overall, and I'm throwing in wide receivers and tight ends. The way I started talking about the Ravens, I did so for this reason. I just don't think there's going to be that many more passing attempts. I don't think, targets fall out of the sky. Mark Andrews is very clearly the top receiver on this team. He's going as tight end 2, 25th overall. Last year he was tight end 4. He had a top 12 finish as a tight end 8 times. He's pretty much as consistent as can be. I will say, I think the only direction for him to go is down. I don't think there's any shot he outperforms like what he has done. I know Lamar Jackson wasn't on the field a lot with him last year, which kind of hurt him a little bit. But I think the Ravens add a lot of receiving talent in Odell Beckham, Zay Jones, and I will say they add Rashad Bateman because he was hurt all of last year. And I don't think there's going to be like the only other players. Demarcus Robinson is no longer on the team. Okay. He had some targets. And then Devin Duvernay is still on the team. He's probably going to see less targets, but he's probably still going to be used because he's a good player. So where are the targets going to be taken from? And I think it has to be Mark Andrews. So if you're saying you're taking him at 25th overall, I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't like it at all either. He played 15 games, 8 of those he was in the top 10 tight end. You said that Lamar wasn't there. That's certainly something to look at, but there's no guarantee Lamar is going to be there. And even when Lamar is there, he had some bad weeks. He's a great player. I think he's a fantastic player in a horrible system. Partially good because since he doesn't throw to wide receivers, he goes to Andrews instead. But like there's just no guarantee here. I think, Kelsey is the one. I think a lot of people are going to be reaching on Andrews too. I think that ADP might actually be a little low. So if we're talking about you have to reach for him too, he's completely off limits for me, even at his current ADP. Um, I'm not a tight end guy, and I don't think anybody should be until the NFL game changes again. There's just no reason for me.
I agree. And then we'll just talk about his backup now since we're there. Isaiah Likely is going as tight end 30. That's 230 overall. So essentially he's not getting drafted. Andrews essentially missed all of weeks 8 and 9. In those weeks, Likely finished as tight end 2 and tight end 9. Like if you are a person who likes to draft handcuffs, and usually that's at the running back position, I think you might as well go for a handcuff like Isaiah Likely, who is pretty much guaranteed to be great if the top guy goes down, and it's at a position of even greater scarcity. So I really like the value of Isaiah Likely, actually.
Yeah, I think he's perfect for best ball drafts too. I think
Yeah.
maybe the funniest stat line was week 9 against New Orleans. 1 catch, 24 yards, 1 touchdown. That's good enough for tight end 9.
True.
He's a hell of a player. Obviously, when Andrews is on the field, it's going to be a little tougher with all these wide receivers, a little tougher. But I mean, they drafted him when they had Andrews for a reason. He's an absolute stud. When he's on the field, he's going to make a lot of plays, and Obviously you're not going to be drafting him, but I think that's where his value kind of lies. I mean, if you don't have to waste a draft pick on him, I mean, most teams have two guys injured by week two. So there's probably going to be a chance you have a roster space open, and he's one of those guys that I think would be fine if you fill your last spot with him.
Agreed. So now these wide receivers. So I have 5 written down. There's Rashad Bateman, Odell Beckham Jr., Zay Jones, Nelson Aguilar's there, and then Devin Duvernay. I think Devin Duvernay is a great player, not draftable. Nelson Aguilar, I think, is an upgrade over what the Ravens have had, but he's not draftable. Rashad Bateman's going the first out of the 3 remaining. Then he's going as wide receiver 45. That's 102 overall. In his first 5 full games last year, he had 27 targets, 285 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I was a Rashad Bateman believer last year. I still am a Rashad Bateman believer this year, mostly because he's going as 102 overall, and I think he's talented. So if he's healthy, which I guess is a big if with this entire Ravens team, hopefully they did something different with their medical staff this offseason. I need to look into that. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I like Bateman's value, and I'll just talk about all 3, and then you can talk about all 3. Odell's coming in as wide receiver 50, 115 overall. I just feel like it's really, really hard to believe Odell would be wide receiver 50. If he's healthy, he's going to be better than that. And then if he's hurt, you're going to drop him. So I think you might as well draft him higher than wide receiver 50. I like him as a value there. And then the rookie Zay Jones trended up draft boards before the draft as a versatile speedster, wide receiver 58 overall, 135 overall. I think he could be a great guy for this offense. I think they had a similar kind of player in Devin Duvernay last year, and they didn't do anything with it on a consistent basis, at least. Once it started working, they got away from it. New offensive coordinator this year. Hopefully they can do something different. But for me, Zay Jones is a stay away type of player.
Zay Flowers.
Zay Flowers. Did I say Zay Jones?
Yeah.
I like Zay Jones more than Zay Flowers.
Yeah, Odell Beckham's the oldest 30-year-old of all time. He just is. I don't know how he's only 30. It doesn't make sense. His injury history is obviously scary, but I mean, at the same time, there's not much he needs to do to be the wide receiver 1 here. I'm not saying that's anything great for fantasy, but that counts for something. Bateman, I like. Bateman's the perfect, and people don't understand this, so I'm going to hit it home again. Bateman proves that fantasy football is like playing the stock market. Really, any fantasy sport is. He will go off. He will have a 3 or 4 week stretch where he will go off. Trade him immediately. Trade guys high, buy him low. I think he's a great player. He's going to be fantastic, but just because somebody's doing good, don't put him on your no-touch list. I think he's good at that ADP because he has to do very little to get past it. I won't touch him just out of personal disbelief in this Ravens wide receiver group, but either way. And then the last guy, Zay Flowers. Personally, I mean, I didn't look at a ton of the wide receivers extensively. I get why they drafted Flowers. I get he's a good player. I think out of all the wide receivers that were drafted in the first round, I think he's maybe the worst fit here. I just don't see how they use him. I don't think to your point about Duvernay, they haven't used him, and he's kind of the same guy. So I just don't buy him either. So it's a tough wide receiver room I'd rather stay away from. But if you're telling me that you can get Bateman or Beckham as a wide receiver 5, which is possible, you can do a lot worse than that.
Completely agree. So then sleeper best value. I like both Gus Edwards and Isaiah Likely a ton at their values right now.
Yeah, Edwards are likely. I think they're the only options, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think Bateman and Beckham are good values. I just think the other 2 who are going undrafted are better. Lastly, best team in the division, at least for fantasy, we got the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow is going as the 4th quarterback off the board at 36 overall. Last year, he finished as quarterback 4. He had 11 weeks as a top 12 guy. And again, quarterback 4, that includes the week where they played the Bills and he had 1 drive or whatever it was. So Yeah, I love Joe Burrow. Their offensive line gets better. Their wide receiver core is essentially the same. Don't even really think about it, right? Like at 36, is 36 too high? I don't know.
It's tough because the Bengals love to pass the ball, clearly. They
Mm-hmm.
clearly have the weapons for it. Um, am I also correct? Is Joe Mixon, he's not a free agent, is he? They still have him for another year?
He's he's still there at the
Okay.
moment.
I don't know why I thought he was a free agent, but I mean, they have good running game and they still love passing the ball. 36 for me seems a little high. Um, although I don't like drafting quarterbacks in the first 5 rounds unless they're an absolute game breaker that has fallen somehow. Um, so I would stay off, but he's one of the most consistent quarterbacks. So if you are going to draft a quarterback up there, I think he's in the conversation with him, Mahomes, and Josh Allen.
Yeah, I guess. Would you rather have Mahomes at 20, Josh Allen at 23, Jalen Hurts at 26, Joe Burrow at 36, or Lamar Jackson at 42?
I'd take Joe Burrow at 36.
That's kind of where I'm at too. Like I think again, two people here who don't draft quarterbacks high. Joe Burrow is going right around Kenneth Walker, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, Debo Samuel. I'm going to take all of those guys probably over a quarterback. That's just me. That's just you. But in terms of value at the quarterback position, I don't hate where Joe Burrow's going. He's relatively safe. Again, only thing that can hurt him is injury, and they at least improve the offensive line, which is all we can really ask for. Running back. Now, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's still a guy that I think could lose his job. I think he still could be cut before, during training camp, save a bunch of money. And like if the Bengals can agree to terms on Dalvin Cook for like $3 million, I don't know why they wouldn't cut Joe Mixon, add Dalvin Cook, and save money. Like that just seems like a no-brainer to me. We shall see. But currently, Joe Mixon's going as running back 15. That's 40th overall. He was RB10 last year while essentially missing 3 weeks. He was a top 12 guy 6 times. So if he's on the team still, they don't make any other additions. 40th overall, I don't hate it. Like he's got a lot of crap going on off the field, so we'll see where his head's at. But I don't hate Joe Mixon at 40th overall, RB15.
Yeah, I don't hate it horribly overall. I know most people see that Joe Mixon is not a good guy. I'll make that assumption, seeing he also punched people in college. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know why we're acting like Deshaun Watson is so much worse than him. I think he should probably also be in that same conversation.
sure.
So I can see why people want to cheer for him, especially when you're talking about punching people. But um, he's good. I'm a little worried about his touchdown numbers last year and his usage last year. Obviously, missed some games. That happens, but there were a lot of plays near the goal line or close to the goal line where I thought running the ball would have made a lot of sense, and they just loved passing the ball and forcing it. So I don't know what to make of that, but I'm thinking about that in the back of my mind if I'm drafting them.
They also like Samaje Perine a lot, who's no longer on the team, but they opted to use him in the red zone as well. Samaje Perine had 2 rushing touchdowns last year, 4 receiving touchdowns. So they did that while Joe Mixon was healthy, essentially. So keep that in mind. But yeah, don't hate Joe Mixon's value. Don't love it. Don't hate it. It's just whatever. Chase Brown is the backup there. Rookie Chase Brown going as RB59, 193 overall. I think he's an NFL ready running back. I think he's a workhorse. And I think if he performs extremely well in training camp, he could get Joe Mixon fired, essentially, plus legal stuff. I'm not sure if there's more to come out this summer or not. Not 100% sure. But like if Chase Brown emerges as the RB1 there, I think buy it because I think he's good. And regardless, at RB59, I assume that comes up. But he is a guy that could have a lot of fantasy value this year, regardless of what Joe Mixon does. Because Joe Mixon's had stretches where he has been relatively inefficient. And I just don't think Chase Brown's going to be that. I think he's just going to pound the rock. He's just going to run the football. He's not going to be flashy, but he's a workhorse. and I think he could fit this Bengals offense very well. So watch him.
Yeah, and I mean, it's unlikely that this happens, but I mean, there is a scenario where Elliott, Hunt, and Cook are still available as this offseason goes off. I think it's unlikely, but I mean, with all the legal troubles and stuff with Mixon, I mean, is it completely out of realm of possibility? To your point, if they believe in Chase Brown, if he's a workhorse, put him RB1, maybe sign one of those other guys RB2. Granted, Kareem Hunt has his own issues too, but point still
Yeah.
stands. Like there are many options for the Bengals where they cut Joe Mixon and they're perfectly fine. They still have leverage back there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying Brown is going to take over the backfield. I'm not saying Mixon's a horrible player, but there's definitely a lot going right for Brown when there's not as much going right for Mixon as has been in years past.
I pray the Bengals cut Joe Mixon and pick up either Kareem Hunt, Ezekiel Elliott, or Dalvin Cook, because there is some moral shit with every one of them, and I can't wait to be on a microphone and be like, "Oh, you're taking the moral high ground and picking up this guy," because it's such a Bengals move to do, and I hope they do it. That would be so fun, so fun. But yeah, Chase Brown, good value. Wide receivers: Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Charlie Jones, all good football players. Jamar Chase is going as wide receiver 2, which is second overall. Last year, he finishes wide receiver 11, wide receiver 6 on a per game basis, which includes that game against the Bills. Again, he had one drive essentially. He is a top 12 guy 5 times. I'm a known Jamar Chase hater. I know there's few of us out there. He has convinced me a little. He's better than I deemed him to be. I don't think he is the second best wide receiver in football. I don't think he's a top 5 wide receiver in football. And for that reason, I'm not taking him as wide receiver 2. I think he's going to continue to be inconsistent because he's not necessarily a one-trick pony, but he might be a 2-trick pony, and I don't need it. I'd rather take someone who I know can win on a weekly basis versus a player that can be game planned out.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely things I like about him, and the fact that I mean, you can't beat around the bush that they love force feeding him the ball. And if you're talking PPR, I mean that is huge. But there is a reason he was outside the top 30 receivers for 4 weeks straight against some good and some not so good defenses. His touchdowns are also come and go. So I like him as a receiver. I think he's a very good receiver for fantasy. Wide receiver 2, that shouldn't even be a question. He shouldn't be anywhere near that conversation. I would even go as far to say he's a low wide receiver 1 because of the inconsistency. I don't think he's any lower than that, but I mean, wide receiver 2, uh, he doesn't deserve to be there. He's not in the same realm as a Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, stuff like that.
Like, why would you not take Cooper Kupp? It doesn't make sense to me. I understand he's coming off injury. He's going to be okay. Now, the hype continues with these young Cincinnati wide receivers. T. Higgins is going as wide receiver 12. That's 27 overall. Last year, he finished as wide receiver 18, and he finished as a top 12 wide receiver only 4 times. This is a rare situation where it's usually the opposite. Usually people think a player is really good because they're a good fantasy player. Like that, people see the Madden points, people see the Madden overall, people see the fantasy football points, and they're like, oh, they're a good player. In this case, I think T. Higgins is an unbelievable football player, and people are making him a great fantasy player because of it, and that's just not true. Like, he finished as a top 12 guy 4 times, and he's getting drafted as the 12th highest wide receiver. It makes no sense to me. He's drastically overrated. He has to be.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing for him is I don't know what it is about Higgins, but some of these hits he's taken. I mean, he
True.
kind of reminds me of Brandon Cooks 2.0. I mean, there was like a 3 week stretch last year where it felt like he was getting his head knocked off every play.
Mm-hmm.
He's a great receiver. He gets plenty of targets. But I mean, you look at his finishes, weeks 2 through 9, 19, 14, 26, 0, obviously got hurt, 10, 14, 13, 13. Those are wide receiver 2 numbers.
Sure.
Those aren't wide receiver 1. And assuming most leagues are playing with 10, 12, 14 teams, I don't see an avenue where he's a top 12 wide receiver.
No, Like, and there's no situation, barring injury again, we keep saying this, but there's no situation where he improves this year, barring injury, to Jamar Chase, I think. Like, his role is what his role is. He's a good football player. And if we want to get into the business of football, I think the Bengals would love for him to have a down year so they could sign him to more money. Like, it happens. It happens. So I don't know. Don't love him at 12. Tyler Boyd's going as the 56th wide receiver. That's 130 overall. He finished as wide receiver 34 last year, and he was a top 30 guy 4 times. Again, he's not somebody to get super excited about. He is a guy that continues to perform if one of the top 2 guys gets hurt, and they do get hurt every once in a while because it's football. So I think Tyler Boyd's a pretty good value at 56, but he's not going to be a guy that you want to start early in the season, which could be very frustrating. So probably not a guy I end up with, but if you're going in a 16-team draft or something like that, like, he's going to be valuable at some point this year. He always is.
I love Tyler Boyd. I think he's one of the most underrated fantasy assets there is. I don't think, yeah, I mean, week to week, he had what, 2 top 10 finishes, 2, 3, 4 in the top 30. Like, he's nothing special, but last year was the same thing. I mean, he was going in the 12th rounds of some leagues. I took him in the 12th, and, he's wide receiver 33 at the end of the day. Uh, it's not hard to get in the top 50 of wide receiver. He's absolutely going to do it from everything we've seen from him. He's not a sexy pick, but I guarantee you, Trevor's guarantee of the week in lieu of Luke, I guarantee you, if you get him in the 10th round or later, at the end of the year, maybe not week to week, but at the end of the year, you're going to go, that was probably one of the best value picks I could have made in that round. Because guys are going to get hurt. He gets his, and his last PPR finishes 33, 31, 29, 18, 16. Those are all way ahead of that.
That's completely fair. And then not much to say about this guy, but rookie Charlie Jones is there as well. He's talented. Bengals like him. He could play his way into a role and get T. Higgins fired, essentially. But I don't think that happens. I think I think Tyler Boyd's going to exit pretty soon, so maybe that's how he gets his role on this offense. He's more of a dynasty, long-term investment. This year, probably not valuable. At tight end, they made a change. Hayden Hurst is out of town. Hayden Hurst finished as tight end 21 with the Bengals last year. He had 5 weeks as a top 12 guy. This year, though, it's Irv Smith Jr. there. He's going as tight end 20, 171 overall. He played pretty good last year with the Vikings before he got hurt. This is a guy that, like, 2 years in a row now, the past 2 years, a lot of fantasy people were saying this is the Irv Smith breakout year. He's going to be so good. You have to go get this guy. And then he gets hurt and he switches teams, and now people are acting like he doesn't exist. So to your point, fantasy football stock market here, buy low, sell high. This is a buy low opportunity for Irv Smith. Obviously, his ceiling is restricted because of the other massive pass catchers on the team. But if you're saying he's going to finish better than what Hayden Hurst did last year in the exact same role, I believe it, barring injury. He's just a better receiver than Hayden Hurst is. So I think he could be a pretty dynamic player on this offense, actually.
Yeah, I think he can be dynamic. How much you can trust that on a week-to-week basis in fantasy remains to be seen. I'm sure he'll have one game with a 30, 40-yard touchdown that'll put him in the top 7 of tight ends in a week, and then he'll have weeks where he has 2 catches for 24 yards. He's tough to judge. I think at this point, or where he's being drafted, tight ends are kind of a crapshoot anyways. But, I mean, from a whole season outlook, if we're talking about your tight end is hurt or your tight end is on bye, I think you can throw him in any week and have confidence that he has just as high of a ceiling as pretty much anybody outside the elite options.
Completely agree. Best value, best sleeper, undoubtedly for me is Chase Brown. I don't think there's much other value on this team.
I mean, I'll go Tyler Boyd, but outside it, and that's only because he's being drafted so late. Chase Evans is the only other guy, realistically.
Completely agree. And that is the AFC North. As we said in the beginning, I think this is a good division in real life. And then for fantasy, there's a lot of really, really good players in this division at every position. So if somehow you play like a division fantasy league where you have to draft players from a division or something like that, this is a great division to do so. I think a lot of people would shy away from it because they think AFC North is that hard-nosed defensive football where it's going to be a 13-16 game. And I don't think it's that anymore. I think there's a couple of those games, like when the Steelers play the Ravens, it's probably going to be that. But otherwise, I think there's a lot of producers on this team. I think there's a lot of mid to late round guys you can target from these on this division. So that's that, I suppose. And tomorrow, then we're going to be breaking down the AFC South, which is a complete flip. We're going from a good football division to possibly the worst in the NFL. There's some fantasy goodness, I guess, but there's going to be a lot of like me sighing. I feel like there's just a lot of bullshit and bad football that's going to be played from these divisions, and it makes me sad because I want the Texans to be good. I want Mike Vrabel to be good. For some reason, people are talking like he can't coach football now, which blows my mind. Like I don't know. I shouldn't get into my feels about it already because tomorrow's going to be all of it. But do you have anything else to say about the AFC North or to preview the AFC South tomorrow?
Well, for the AFC North, it looks like, and it's tough. I'm going through all the team schedules. It looks like they play the NFC North,
Mm-hmm.
the AFC West, and the AFC East in terms of like uncommon opponents. The NFC North, I mean, Bengals, Vikings, Browns, Bears, Ravens. I think played the Packers. Maybe no Steelers, Packers, Ravens, Lions. Excuse me. Um, like even if you're in the mindset that the defenses are going to be good, their out of division games look pretty good against not a lot of great defenses.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very least, there will be a lot of shootouts. So even if you are to think that it's a hard nosed football game with every game ending 20-10, which isn't true, um, they have some good matchups outside the division. Division is going to be tight. They're going to be playing for it all year. Nobody's going to run away with it. Nobody's going to be really rested. So there's not really a lot of downside like you're going to get with other divisions.
Yeah, I completely agree. So definitely buy low in the AFC North. Again, tomorrow night, AFC South. So follow us wherever you're watching, if it's YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook. We will be back right here again tomorrow night. And hopefully, relatively soon, probably next week, I will have an announcement for the Fantasy Football by Committee podcast, which we will ask you to follow, share, rate, review. So get ready. Get your review already typed up so you can copy and paste it in immediately under 5 stars. But we'll be back tomorrow night.